Good evening, everybody, and good afternoon to folks that are joining us from the West Coast and other time zones where it might be a little bit earlier in your day. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar on how to talk about abortion and faith. I'm going to give it a few more seconds, possibly a minute, as I see many more people joining us. We're already up to almost 500, which is so exciting that this many people are here for this conversation on a Thursday evening. I'm overjoyed and so blessed to be having this discussion with all of you. Welcome, welcome. All right, everybody. I know that some folks are already asking some questions around the logistics of this. So before we get started and do a real welcoming, I am going to pass it to Allison from the Women's March team to just give a rundown of the logistics for today.
Hi everyone, welcome. So just want to give you some Zoom tips and trick. I know we've been doing this for a year now and everyone is pretty much okay with Zoom, but just want to let you know that we are in a webinar setting. So that means we have lovely panelists ready to talk to us, but that also means that we cannot contact them or chat them. They cannot chat each other. And it's just very distracting. We want to be respectful of our guests, but there also is the Q&A function. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see two little quote bubbles and it says Q&A. And so that's where you can type your question. So please use that for questions only, not comments, not opinions. Just if you have a genuine question on what we're talking about, or a question even about the tech behind what we're doing, if you want to make sure things are recorded, please ask your questions there. If you email us a question later, we might answer it or might not. But if you have a question right now, put it in the Q&A. You will remain muted. Your camera is not on. So don't worry if you're in sweatpants after work, not a problem at all. And we're happy you're here.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. And I'm seeing some questions about whether this will be recorded. Yes, it is currently being recorded. And Allison can drop the link to the Women's March YouTube channel where we'll be uploading this webinar as soon as we're done today. So you can definitely share it with other members of your community and organizations, or if you need a refresher on something somebody said. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. This will not be a slideshow heavy webinar, but I did want to start off with an introductory slide before we pull the screen down and get into conversation. So my name is Noor. My full name is Noor Mir. I run digital advocacy at the Women's March. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm calling in from Washington, D.C., where the sun is finally shining after a week of dreary cloudiness. And I'm so excited to be having this conversation with so many of you this Thursday. So before we get started, I just want to share a little bit of context, a level setting about what brings us all together today. So we're chatting about 12 days after an incredible nationwide mobilization, the Rally for Abortion Justice, which the Women's March organized with a very diverse coalition, a large coalition of over 100 organizations around the country. So there were nearly 700 marches in all 50 states. And honestly, the feedback and the stories that we've been receiving have been really moving. All of you managed to weave in intergenerational storytelling, music, art. My favorite moment was when teenagers took to the stage and talked about young people and their reproductive rights. And also bringing together abortion providers and congresspeople and officials who have to make some really serious decisions about how they're going to continue supporting abortion access and care. So we also know that many people have been fighting this for many years, and that the rally is a much bigger piece of the overall movement that we are all a part of. So what are we fighting for? And Allison, if you could move to the next slide. So the truth is that abortion has always existed, and it will always continue to exist. Abortion is pivotal healthcare, and it cannot be delayed. It is our right to be able to shape our families, to access the healthcare that we need, to decide when or whether we want to be having children and how we shape our daily decisions, and for that care to be funded and not to leave families and individuals scraping by. So I want to talk a little bit about our values before we head into the conversation. So the first one is autonomy. So all people should have the ability to make decisions about their lives and bodies, to access abortion care when they need it in the way that works best for them and with the guidance and support of providers that they trust. We also have respect. Everyone should be able to control their own bodies, and that includes respecting and honoring people's decisions to have abortions. When someone decides to have an abortion, it should be safe, affordable, accessible, and free from punishment or judgment. Destigmatizing abortion and being abortion forward, which is what we're going to lean into today, is another value. Now is the time to lead with abortion forward language and ask for what we want. We're not going to veil our language or skirt around what we're talking about. We're going to say the word abortion. We want legally protected, funded, equitable, supported, and destigmatized access to abortion whenever somebody makes their decision. And we're also talking about intersectionality. People of all races, religions, sexual orientations, and gender identities and expressions have abortions. That is the truth. Bans and restrictions disproportionately impact communities that have already survived systemic oppression and people who hold a lot of different identities at the same time. And finally, we're going to be talking about reproductive justice. And I know we have Kenyatta with us from Sister Song, who I'll introduce soon, who coined this framework. So reproductive justice is a human rights framework that was coined nearly 30 years ago. Sister Song defines it as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children that we have in safe and sustainable communities. So I wanted to start off with these values before we get into the conversation, because the truth is, we're all here because we're not shying away from talking about abortion. We're saying the word loud and proud. And we're also not shying away here in this conversation from talking about abortion and faith. For me, I grew up Muslim, and it took a long time for me to find the right people in my community to talk about abortion and generally my reproductive health as a whole. All I was told for the longest time was that abortion was not okay, and that is just what you have to accept because that's what's in the book. And it took me a long time until just a few years ago to actually reconnect with Muslim community members and reconnect with leaders that are Muslim and also work in abortion care and are also abortion providers that were able to talk to me about what the book really does say about women's decision making and autonomy. And it made my connection to my own faith a lot stronger. So we know that lawmakers and anti-choice groups manipulate faith values, scripture, and beliefs all the time to make us believe that abortion is just not allowed. So what we're going to do today is push back on that notion. So what we're here today to do is learn about how many faith and spiritual backgrounds actually do address abortion and allow abortion and teach you about what you can be doing to push back against some of these narratives. So today we'll be hearing from some incredible faith leaders about what abortion means to them. And I am going to go ahead and introduce some of these amazing, amazing people. So the first person is Rabbi Danya Rittenberg, who serves as a scholar in residence at the National Council for Jewish Women. Rabbi Danya has been named by Newsweek as one of the 10 rabbis to watch. I know from personal experience that Rabbi Danya has taught me a lot about Judaism and abortion, and actually led to me doing a little bit more of my own investigation into what my own religion says about abortion. So I am very, very glad that you will all get a chance to learn from her as well today. We also have Kenyatta, who is an incredible Black queer woman of Caribbean heritage, is the daughter, granddaughter, and niece of generations of Pentecostal Christian ministers, and has been immersed in a faith community since birth. Currently, Kenyatta is working to build a base of faith leaders and people of faith to support the cause of reproductive health, rights, and access with the incredible organization Sister Song. We have Dr. Elizabeth Fries, who is also going to be joining us today and is a research associate with Auburn Seminary, where her work supports faith-based activism in and religious education for the reproductive movement. She also currently teaches in the religion and society area at Drew University Theological School. Elizabeth's incredible writing and research has taught me a lot about the stories that the Christian right tells us and how our own faith stories and narratives can be ones of justice and liberation. And finally, we have Gina Breedlove. Gina Breedlove is a medicine woman, sound healer, vocalist, composer, and grief doula from Brooklyn, New York. And in 2020, Gina also received a Lives of Commitment Award from Auburn Seminary for her many years of artistry and activism. So there actually couldn't be anyone better suited than Gina to open up our conversation today. So I'm going to turn it over to you to ground us in some ritual before we begin our conversation. And with that, Allison, you took down the screen already, so we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Noah. Greetings, family. We welcome you to our circle today. And as Noor just shared, we're going to ground in a bit of ritual. We're going to bring our breath into the space. And so this is an invitation. I pray that you join us. Wherever you are in this moment, however you are resting, reclining, walking in your car, leaning against a tree, whatever you're doing in this moment is perfect. If you are able, please soften or close your eyes. If you are not, please take your eyes off of us. This allows you to lean into the sound of anything that you can hear and come take this journey with us into your breath and into your body. Focus on what you can hear, please. My bowl, my voice, my breath, and whatever is happening on your end of things. Folk in your home, traffic, rain, silence, wherever you be. We don't resist the sound of the moment, we lean in. Bring your awareness to your breath. Inhaling through your nose, please. Exhaling, through your mouth. And cycle this knowing of inhaling through your nose, exhaling through your mouth at your own pace. Your body knows how to breathe. Bring your awareness to your breath, the sound of my voice, my bowl, and anything else you can hear in this moment. See if you can focus on the sound coming from me. Inhaling and exhaling. Bring your awareness, family, to the soles of your feet. Maybe planted in front of you, maybe you're resting and allowing your back body to be supported by a chair or bed. Listen. Drawing up your awareness from the soles of your feet, up your front body, past knees and shins and thighs and the root of you. Where bottom meets, wherever you are sitting, drawing up your breath, past your navel, the center of your chest, the base of your throat, above your nose, that third eye, to your crown. Inhaling and exhaling, bring your breath, your awareness to your shoulders. Breathe. As we open the space deeper and wider between us, we are grateful to be in communion with you. Please feel welcome. Inhaling deeply through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. Bring your awareness to your hands. What you hold, what you carry, how you touch and are touched. If you are able, please place your hands on your own body in this moment and be at rest as you have capacity. As we move through our shares, remember to breathe. I invite you to breathe. Remember to breathe. We are opening a big moment here Take care of yourselves. Hydrate as you need to. Honor the needs of your body. We are grateful to be here in circle with you. One more breath together, inhaling deeply through your nose. Exhaling, add some sound to that through your mouth. Open your eyes when you are ready. Thank you, Noor.
Thank you. That was beautiful, and I didn't know how much I needed that until I experienced it. So deeply appreciate you leading us through that. So, my friends, you all know what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about abortion and faith. What does it all mean? And we're going to be tackling 4 large but hearty questions together. So, the first question that I want to kick us off with is, we already know why we're here. I know a lot of you were mobilized on October 2nd, probably before, probably continue to be, and have come here from many, many different places. And this is about more than that, right? This isn't just about a law in Texas or what's happening at the Supreme Court. This is about something that's much greater. So I would like to start off with a simple question, which is, why is it important that we have this conversation about abortion and faith right now? Why this moment? And I would love to hear from everybody, but I'm going to start with you, Kenyatta, if you can kick us off.
Sure. Why is it important that we have this conversation now? Well, when we take into consideration the current state of political affairs around reproductive access, around reproductive choice, but also the general reproductive lives of the citizens of this country. And we follow the root of that political stance, we find a flawed religious argument as the support for that. And so what is important right now is for progressive people of faith to be having these conversations openly and loudly, to counter a narrative that says that faithful people are antithetical to bodily autonomy, that we do not understand the creator-given right to have sovereignty over our bodies. And so I think now more than ever, faithful people of all faith expressions who believe in choice, who believe in the right to own our bodies, should make our voices known and heard and loud, because there are more of us than people believe. There are more of us than people know. And it's time for us to be visible in that.
Thank you for that. 2 things, there's definitely more of us than people know and believe. And I think that's so evidenced by the fact that we almost have 1,000 people that are choosing to spend this time with us, right? That are eager to learn about this. And then the second thing you said that really stuck with me was, like, they don't believe that we have a right to this conversation almost. And that's really interesting, is like, where and how are people given access to think about their religion and faith in a way that makes them feel whole, that transforms them, that makes them feel respected, that gives them autonomy. So thanks for bringing that up. That really stuck with me. Rabbi Danya, what are your thoughts on why now, why this moment?
Well, the best time to be having this conversation would have been the mid-70s. The second best time would have been any time in the 80s or the early 90s, or there are a lot of times that we should have been having this conversation, and there were people who were having this conversation the whole way through. And here we are with SB8 back in play in Texas, right? Back in force in Texas. with a case that could overturn Roe in the Supreme Court right now. And so, as we say in my tradition, if not now, when? So, as Kenyatta said, the whole premise of the religious anti-abortion argument is based on a completely flawed premise. Actually just published an op-ed about some of the translation errors that resulted in some of the theology that that got us to where we are in some of the anti-abortion theology. So let's have an honest conversation about what's really in our texts. Let's have an honest conversation about what it means to be created in the divine image and what that means about human dignity and human autonomy and what it means for our commandment to set up a just society. If we can't do that now, then when are we going to?
Thank you for that candid response and the very literal flaws that are interesting to hear and know more about as well.
I will go down with the texts whenever we're ready.
Take us down that path. Elizabeth, what about you?
Well, I want to second, especially what Kenyatta said as far as the importance of the progressive faith voice right now, because so much of the stumbling block in our politics, I think for a lot of people is, how do I reconcile my faith with my perhaps pro-choice leanings, but not necessarily feeling fully morally comfortable with going there politically or publicly. And we just have to address that head on. We have not really addressed abortion directly enough in terms of faith, especially the argument that the religious right has been making, and unfortunately succeeding in convincing people is the only moral way to look at this. So we have to address it head on. And I'll just, my home discipline is sociology, so I'll just kind of add that piece of things too. I mean, we're in a moment where we're kind of freaked out, but at the same time, honestly, I think that people that are trying to oppress all kinds of people are the ones that are really freaked out. And I think this is, really a backlash to strength that is happening in multiple arenas among progressives. I think that Me Too and Black Lives Matter and immigrant justice and climate justice, and there's so many different movements right now that are really gaining strength, that are pushing against a paradigm of oppression and hierarchy and inequality. And everybody's just done, and they should be done. And what happens though sometimes is that the reproductive justice piece of this gets sidelined. And so what we need to explain very clearly is that is not good or necessary. And anybody coming from a faith perspective that's about one or more forms of justice can take this on board fully, and we want to explain how that is. And really make solidarity, I think, is what everybody needs right now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And also just thinking about, this as a part of this larger push against us becoming stronger is not necessarily a frame that I had considered before, but thank you for that. Gina, what are your thoughts about this? Why now? Why this?
And I want to thank you as well, Elizabeth. That framing, it really created some spaciousness in my spirit. Thank you, because sometimes, you're so in it and you're so in the fight and it's this close. And but that framing helped me to back up a bit and get a bird's eye view. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And, this is a vital conversation for all the things that were said. And for me, it's the way in which this fight is impacting the body. The way I see it impacting the body, the holding of a seeming dichotomy of spirituality and how you worship with having an abortion. often I've worked with folk that feel torn and bad because they've had an abortion. And so, and I just, when I knew that this was happening, I left at the opportunity to be a part of this circle. And my prayer and intention is that it'll be of service in ways that folk can begin to marry these things and make some connection. Yeah, between freedom and spirit. Thank you.
Nora, before we move on, I just want to agree with Gina in that Elizabeth gave us a frame that I always think about in my mind, but she's kind of spoke it for us all to embrace. But I've been saying all year that these are the last gasp of a dying paradigm. It has become very clear that the people of the planet finally understand what our power is, and we will not allow ourselves to be oppressed anymore. And so because of that, the power system, because I don't like to name people, but the power system that exists is going to resist, but it's futile because we are always more powerful as the people, always.
Beautiful. And thank you for that note of resilience and strength, because I really do feel it. And I feel as though it's clear when we're being punished. We're literally being punished for our power, for fighting back. And that's exactly what's happening right now, but we're not going to let it continue. So I want to get into the nitty gritty, which we alluded to, right? Is let's not shy away from talking about some of those translations that Rabbi Danya was talking about, those real errors and flaws. What do our scriptures and books really say? Let's get into it. So my second question is, what faith or spiritual background are you grounded in yourself? And what does it teach us about abortion? So Rabbi Danya, I am going to start with you first. Take us away.
Okay. So I'm a Jew, and so the bottom line, that TLDR, as we say, is in Judaism, abortion is permitted, and it is sometimes required in cases where it's needed to preserve the life, or in some cases, the health of the pregnant person. So we get this from Exodus. There's a case of an accidental miscarriage, or someone is, an accidental miscarriage. Someone is knocked over, and you see a case where if it's just a miscarriage, you pay monetary damages, and if there's if the pregnant person dies, then it's treated as manslaughter. And this is where the translation error is, where I will go there and I will nerd out, but the word that's translated as harm is accidentally translated as in the form in Greek, and it creates this game of telephone that then Augustine uses, that then impacts Catholic theology, and it's a whole thing. But for us, we're like, oh, fetus doesn't have the status of personhood, which gets you to the Talmud, which says, oh, basically, like, fetus is mere water for the first 40 days, which is like 7-8 weeks of gestation, according to how we count, from last menstrual period. And then the fetus is part of the pregnant person's body until birth, part of your body, like an appendix, like your thigh, the Talmud says. And so from there, I could go source to source, but you basically get down to folks who say, abortion is permitted, in cases of emotional woe, in cases of where dignity is at stake, where, these are like sort of very, you've got like people on the Israeli, high court, like, ultra Orthodox will say, like, if there's like emotional pain is as great as physical pain, and, mental health is as equated as physical health. Like, there's an understanding that there are reasons that people need abortions. And if you need one, you should have one. And there's a lot of openness about what that need is, and a lot of space for the person whose body it is to make that decision. So that is where we land. And our tradition is very, very clear that we are commanded to create a just society. And particularly when we look at the ways in which systemic oppression manifests across the board in a myriad ways, it's all the more so that we're commanded to work to create abortion access for everyone in equitable ways, and in ways that are just and true. So that's how we roll.
I love the way you roll. I love the way you roll. I
That's
love
what we do.
the clarity of a commandment for a just society. I want to put that on a banner and take it somewhere, because that is really all you need as your mandate, to fight not only for abortion access and abortion justice, but to right all the wrongs. And I really feel like the fight for abortion justice is about righting a lot of wrongs, right? Like, that really is what it's about. So I appreciate learning from you on that. It's not something that I feel I would have, and I guess this is why this webinar is so needed. You know, if I hadn't met you before, or listened to you before, I don't think that I, as like somebody who grew up Muslim, currently is a Muslim, I don't think I would have known that. So I think it's important to say these things out loud, and ground ourselves in the fact that this is something that all of us are commanded to do. And I'm really curious about that commandment for a just society. And I'm wondering if Kenyatta, with like all of your work, and your upbringing and your own personal history, what does Christianity tell us about a commandment for a just society?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Rabbi. And to be just fully transparent, I grew up in a Black Pentecostal tradition. And truthfully, it wasn't until I was probably in my teens that I really started hearing any kind of sermons or any kind of exegesis around abortion or abortion access. It just wasn't a topic. And that was not to say that there was loud support of it. It's just that it wasn't a topic of concern in terms of preaching, because what came about in the traditions that I grew up in was this leaning into God as the God of the oppressed, God as the God who is on the side of those who are striving against unjust authority and being that liberator. That is the kind of fiery sermons that came across the pulpit for me. I was also blessed to be raised by a father who was a Pentecostal preacher, but also very critical thinker and very much an astute, informed citizen. So he was, very much into politics, and I got political training just as much as religious training from a very, very young age. And one of the things that I admired about my dad is that, and I think informed the way that I moved in the world, it was that he was always pro-choice. He was a Pentecostal preacher who was always pro-choice, and his stance was never in the sense of, it wasn't even a moral standing as much as he was like, I get to make decisions about my life. He says, I don't think necessarily abortion is something that I would want to, do, or I even would want one of my daughters to do. He had 4 daughters, no sons. He says, but just like we get to talk about that and make that choice for us, other people get to make that choice for themselves as well. And so because I had that to counter the dogma of the larger Christian theology, it allowed me room to think for myself. And then when I got older and I got into college, it was actually finding Jewish teachings and Jewish texts that expanded my understanding of where we went wrong in Christianity with some of our interpretations of scripture. And it just kind of sent me down a theological rabbit hole where I was able to reconcile for myself, truthfully, my very own existence in the world, because I am a Black queer woman. And I've known that I was queer, cognitively since I was 14, but I was also brought up in a tradition that said that those being queer and Christian were two things that couldn't coexist. And so going down theological rabbit holes is how I learned to be okay with myself. And now the work that I do in the world is helping people find those rabbit holes for themselves, first of all, so that they can go down those rabbit trails and find out that some of the dogma that we have been told is just not rooted in anything that is actual or factual, but also giving people the room to say it's okay to ask those questions. More than anything, for me, the work that I do in the world is about shifting a narrative that says that questioning is antithetical to your spirituality. Because when you ask the questions, sometimes you will find the answers, but sometimes you won't. But the beauty is in the question. The beauty is in saying, this is something that was told to me that may not be true, and let me see if I can find what's true. And in that space, you get to make decisions for yourself. And to me, that's the whole crux of bodily autonomy. That's the floor, if you will, is to be able to make decisions for your own lives. And I believe in a creator that gave us that right.
Oh, that was a word and some. That was really, really beautifully put. And can I ask a follow-up question? Okay. When we're talking about rabbit holes and some of the rabbit holes that you went down, and that maybe you've seen other folks go down as well. What have they been like? Where did they start? What are some of the common ones?
Well, first of all, the first thing, because I was brought up in a tradition that's very literal, like it takes the Bible as a very literal document. The first thing for me was discovering that the Bible was written at a gazillion different times with a gazillion different historical contexts. It's not this one book that is chronological and everything is laid out the way it's laid out. It's absolutely not. So therefore, if it's written within a space of different historical contexts, then that means that there are different mores that are affecting the text. And that's number one. It's not just this cohesive book that we try to make it out to be. It is actually a collection of stories about God through the eyes of a sect of people in their relationship with God. And so that was like the first, eye opener for me. I was like, okay, so now that gives me space, you know what I'm saying? That gives me room to go further.
Thank you. Yes, the multiple editions and in learning about those for all of us across everything, I was like, I didn't know there was a follow-up to this. Nobody told me, until I found out in a bookstore. Cool. But Elizabeth, would love to hear from you on some of these nitty-gritty details.
Well, my first part of my answer is easy because I'm currently a UU, and UUs have essentially said, yeah, RJ, that sounds good. So because UUs have principles that they hold dear that are essentially human rights principles. So, in terms of autonomy of body and well-being and dignity and worth and democratic, power dynamics, the ability to think freely for yourself, believe what you believe. I mean, those are all core principles to Unitarian Universalists. So the RJ approach to reproductive issues, was absolutely a fit. And so that's kind of where that tradition has gone. So there's not a ton more to say about that other than it's completely compatible. But I think that where a lot of people who are already on board with liberation and autonomy and justice and that sort of thing, I think where they sometimes trip is they say, yes, I'm all for that. But isn't abortion murder? Like they don't know how to reconcile those two things. Because again, the religious right has been so successful in drilling that point. And I'm going to say more about that whole issue in a minute, but I'll just say that I think that liberation theology in its various iterations I think this is the growing edge for that, that liberation theology has to do more to, like it's all right there. It's right there on the precipice, but it has to do more to articulate the specifics of how repro is also completely in tune with liberation theology. So I'll say more about that in a minute, but those are kind of my two motivators, is Unitarian Universalism and liberation theology.
I think, sorry to jump in, Nora, but I think that is one of the desires, the quest, the heart of womanist theology, because it understood that even within the framework of liberation theology, there was a whole perspective that was being left out, which gave birth to, Black women saying, hey, we are finding ourselves in the text, and we are talking about what liberation for us looks like. And so I think that there's a lot of good work being done in terms of womanist theology around this subject. I know Dr. Tony Bond is currently working on a reproductive justice virtue as a womanist ethicist around this subject, just to talk about what you're talking about, Elizabeth, taking that lens of liberation theology to that next phase.
That is exciting. And Elizabeth, when we were beginning to talk about liberation theology, and we'll get into that with the next question, but we have gotten some very straightforward questions for talking about exactly that, is what do you say when everybody's telling you that abortion is murder? So just let's hold on to that for the next question, because it seems like that's still a thing. I know it's a thing, but a lot of folks are experiencing that at this moment. So we'll get into that in the next frame. But Gina, what about in your own life, your own experience, your own upbringing, your own spirituality? What has it taught you about abortion?
I was raised in, I think folks used to call a holy roller Baptist. I knew you would know what that was, Kenyatta. A holy roller Baptist, wood chips in the hair, passing spirit. Possession was the means and the connector to God. I was baptized in a river, with the congregants like singing, you through the streets. This was my orientation and my understanding of God. It was nature. It was close to the ground. It was inside of us. And also I remember, and also informed by Black women, like the mothers of the church is what they're called. And so all of the healing circles, which I know now were sound healing circles, because women would moan and use sound to move grief and rage and heal each other and connect with each other. There was also a mother of the church that if you got in a family way and you were not ready to give birth, you went and saw this mother. I was young enough, but old enough. I was aware, but, and that was where the conversation ended, and it was done holistically, and the person was not ostracized from the church, and folks held each other. This was my orientation. And so I know that to this day, so much of my practice is sourced from my feeling of connectedness to nature and to into autonomy, agency, sovereignty, dominion. That's what I felt of my body. I didn't have the language for it, but when I look back, those are the words that come. And when it comes to how I feel about abortion, it comes from that place. And now my practice is, I feel, predate language and naming. You know, when I am in spirit and when I am moving through possession now or channeling to do my work, there's no container of a name or a book, right? And so, and that's where my work comes from. And so it's about communing with a spirit. And when I work with women who have had abortion or are about to get an abortion, it's about these agreements that you make with this spirit that has come through, right? And releasing this spirit and caring for yourself and making that the root, centering your own care in it. So that's been my orientation, and that's what it is to this day.
Thank you for that beautiful story. And I felt like I could really connect, Gina, to what you were saying about this care that was there unasked, even if it was not, not named. It was there. I feel very similarly. I feel like the first time I even knew abortion existed was knowing that my mom and a few other people had this like underground sort of like funding other people's abortion situation happening, where they were just collecting funds for people and making it happen. I didn't know where. I just knew that it was a conversation that used to take place in the living room, and that they all knew somebody's daughter, that needed one. And I remember just being so confused, so curious, but really interested in why, all of my aunties were getting together and talking about this over tea. And I remember just sitting cross-legged on the floor being like, I wonder what all of these women are conspiring about. But it took me a while to figure out what that was.
Gina, and what you're talking about, Gina, is kind of what I was talking about in my statement when I said that those sermons were not preached in our pulpits. That came so much later when it became a political tool, and people who wanted political power decided to introduce that to Black church spaces. But before that, it was understood that women were doing what they needed to do to take care of themselves, and it just wasn't talked about. So that's what I meant when I said that. It like I said, it wasn't something. I'm not going to pretend like it was a celebrated thing, but it was just not something that was demonized from our pulpits, and that came later.
I love hearing about these like communities of care that exist. So just on just thinking about these communities of care is so important, because I do feel like that's what's going to continue to happen. That is what mobilizing and activating and organizing is doing, especially for people that are connecting intergenerationally, is beautiful. And I really feel like movement spaces are where that is happening. And I am learning from you all that this is also something that was embedded in your own experiences as well. So I would love to hear a little bit about how we push back. Like, what do we do when we are being demonized and being told that you're going against the book, you're going against religion, you're messing up, right? With all of the shame and the stigma that comes with that. Especially for younger people that might still be in relationships with or in households where they're told that it's this way or no way. How do you push back against that? What do we do? What are the frames that you all use in your daily work, in your organizing, in your scholarship? And I want us to start off with that question, those questions that we're getting in the Q&A around abortion is murder. That is something we all hear all the time. How do we tackle that? How do we push back? What do we do? And Elizabeth, I hope you can kick us off with this. I'm going to see who else wants to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I think the first thing is to be bold and be innovative. because the ways that we've been talking about this have been, they're trapped, they're tired, they're ineffective. And I think that's just because so much of our thinking has been captured by a male-centric patriarchal way of looking at this. And so I really like the fact that, what Gina is saying about the embodied dimension of this and the connectedness through bodies. That's so important, because that's really where we have to go. We have to go to the bodies who have the capacity to gestate. And those bodies are the ones primarily that are needing to push back and to say, no one has the right to take over this capacity. And so the reason why I foreground that and put it in conversation with liberation theology is because there are infinite, areas of liberation theology, but one of the primary articulations, modern articulations, was from Gustavo Gutierrez in Latin America in relation to worker oppression and exploitation. And so the issue there was labor being, colonized and put toward the ends of others, essentially. And if you do that and you center labor, and then you bring that into, you become much more inclusive and intersectional in your understanding of what you do with that. If you bring that into repro, you center the laborer, you center the person who does the gestation labor, you realize the complete absurdity of saying that life begins at conception. Like utter absurdity. That is coming from a notion that, to kind of paraphrase Dr. Margaret Kamitska, that fertilization is procreation. Fertilization is one thing, but procreation is 99.9% gestation. And it is over a very long period of time that this occurs. So there is no such thing as a life, a baby, a child, at a point, at conception, certainly, but not until way, way, way into gestation. So by centering labor, we do a couple of things. One, we put the real person back into the frame. We put the person who can be pregnant or who may gestate or may not gestate. That person with that person's autonomy and human rights into the center. And then when we realize that that procreation is a process, then we completely push aside this notion that there's a life right away, and therefore that ending that process of gestation is somehow murder. It is not. And then we can move into liberation. Then we can move into, okay, now what happens with these bodies who have the capacity to liberate, who have this labor capacity? Because we can also understand that those people can be linked and understood just like other people who are doing work, immigrants who are not being, paid properly, or, people in the home who are doing unpaid, unvalued labor, or, people in restaurants, or people who are devalued for their labor, based on race and ethnicity. So what we can start to see is that the reproductive issue is a labor justice issue in many ways. And we can totally push aside and table the craziness of the idea that there's a life and that there's murder just because you don't feel like doing the labor right now. Don't feel like it, can't, it's going to hurt you, whatever it is, it's going to make you poor. Plenty of studies on that, under certain circumstances. And so just because I don't want to be oppressed and do this labor does not mean that I'm killing anyone. Just be bold about that. So that's my primary thing that I want to, really put out there, is a very different frame of looking at when life begins and who's involved in that that creation. And I can say more about the biblical dimensions of that, but
Yeah.
I know Danya's got a lot to say about that too. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I swear, Elizabeth, sort of the first time that you talked to me about this from a labor justice lens, I like literally hadn't even thought about that. I was like, I had not even thought about this as like work in that way. And so thank you for bringing that in. And for again centering the person who was doing the labor, which sadly is not done enough. But Rabbi Danya, I want to hear from you because I know that you have some gems to offer on this.
Okay, first of all, I have no idea how I'm going to follow that. Let's just be clear. But I will say this. Y'all heard me talk a little bit about Judaism's perspective on when life begins, which is during birth, like when personhood begins, right? The moment our ancient texts, like that Second Temple text, so 2,000 years old at least, make it clear that the moment when you're deciding, if you have to sort of decide between the person who's giving birth and the person who is being born, that it's only like halfway through the birthing process would you even consider not prioritizing the person who is giving birth, because even like any time before that, it's like really clear that the adult's life is the person, and only midway through the birthing process do you think like, okay, well, here's a person too. So that's when personhood begins in Judaism. So if you assume that, right, if in Judaism, right, the fetus is a part of the person's body, then all of this abortion is murder, and attempts to legislate a position that says abortion is murder is basically all of these laws become a religious freedom issue. Right? This is a First Amendment issue. And even the statement, abortion is murder, is Christian hegemony, an attempt to enforce a Christian position, a Christian moral position on non-Christians, right? And in Islam, there are positions that say, abortion may be permitted up to 4 months, et cetera. Like, it's not true that everybody holds this position, not all Christian positions. There are many, many, many Christian denominational statements. We can, list off everybody's stuff, but this attempt to impose a hegemony over everybody else, and the moment we try to legislate it, we have this imposition of one theological position over the citizens and inhabitants of a country. Some have no religion, some have many, many other religions. And it becomes both an issue of philosophical and, if we are getting into legislation, like very, very concrete problematic issues of church and state and hegemony. So
Thank you for that. Gina and Kenyatta, I have specific questions for you all about two things that I've heard you name before. Number one, compassionate care. Number two, reproductive justice. So I would love to talk a little bit about what those frames mean to you all in your work, and how you've been able to use, this philosophy, these frameworks, to push back on some of these false narratives. But either of you can start. I know that this is something that you're both excited about and integrate into your daily lives.
Well, I can start. First of all, I always view this conversation about abortion and abortion rights and abortion access through the frame of reproductive justice. as you mentioned earlier, reproductive justice is a frame. It was started in 1994 by 12 Black women who understood at the time that the choice movement at the time was not addressing the full reproductive lives of Black women, Indigenous women, Latinx women, Latina women, poor women, women of color, because it was kind of hyper-focused on the concept of right, the right to having an abortion, without addressing the fact that a lot of women in those groups that I've named didn't even have access to general health care, let alone reproductive health care. That a lot of women who were in those groups that I named lived in societies, lived in neighborhoods and communities that had environmental things that directly affected their reproductive lives. Like it was the larger movement at the time in 1994 was just not addressing that. And so these 12 Black women decided that there needed to be a place where the concept of reproductive rights, health, and justice all came together. And that's where they came up with that, the term, the frame, reproductive justice. When we use the frame of reproductive justice, when we talk about abortion, it opens the field of accessibility, I think, to such a wider audience. Because the fact of the matter is if we look at abortion through the frame of reproductive justice, we can see that there are things that disproportionately affect women of color. For instance, Black women's maternal health in this country is abysmal. It is among the worst compared to other developed countries. And understanding that restricting healthcare access in any way, including abortion, is just going to make that harder, gives people a frame to say, okay, even if I don't think abortion is great, I know that restricting abortion is going to inflate this maternal mortality issue, which I am passionate about. And so it gives them a way to reconcile whatever moral distaste that they have in their mouths, because there is a greater good at hand, in that there's something else that they're passionate about that this abortion issue actually has a direct effect on. So yeah, reproductive justice is such an intersectional frame that it allows us to see things like Elizabeth was talking about, that reproductive justice is a labor justice issue. It's, and it's a racial justice issue. And one of the main things that I think that reproductive justice allows us to see is that most systems of oppression are rooted in a white supremacist patriarchal base. Like it all roots from that. There is a paternalism that exists in white supremacist patriarchy that says that white male thought is the thought that gets to rule everybody else's lives. And that reproductive justice says, no, actually, I am an individual human being with bodily autonomy and sovereignty, and I actually get to make decisions about my life. And I think using the frame of reproductive justice allows people space to see that justice does not exist for any of us until it exists for all of us, including people who can be pregnant having the right to make the decisions for their lives. I'll stop there.
Ashe all day to every bit of that. And so I love the frame. I appreciate the frame, and I source the frame of reproductive justice in my work as well. And I want to lean into the compassionate care aspect of that, because Kenyatta said everything so brilliantly. I'll just say yeah to all of that. And in terms of compassionate care, for me, underneath that frame, and I get to move toward focusing on the individual right? The woman who has had an abortion or is considering an abortion. And in my work, focus that care on allowing them, inviting them, and moving them through rituals around evicting any narrative that says that they do not own their body, and working on dominion from that place, right? And that's a daily practice, because even though I do understand that this is the last gasp of a dying way of being, there's a very long reign of the upside down, and there's a tremendous amount of harm that is done every day, right? And anything dying, death sometimes is not pretty. It can be horrible. And if something is fighting to live, it's going to grab and take, swipe, and harm anything that it can, right? And so that's also true. We see that, and I see the way and work with the way that we swallow these narratives. We take them in our body, right? Because we're weaned on it. It's everywhere. It's pushing against us all day long. This dominant narrative of abortion being murder. Right. And how is anyone supposed to hold that? Where are you supposed to put it? I'm so grateful to this panel. You've expanded my vocabulary and you've given me more language. Thank you. And working with the individual, going into wherever that narrative lands in the body and evicting it. And that's a longer conversation through breath work, through moving grief out of the body, through sounding. I have different rituals that I lean on, and I have a community of folk that do somatic work. And often it's several of us, working with one person, depending on what the person needs, right? But these systems of care, and also too, this cross-relational work that this adjacent work of food justice and trans women rights and LGBTQ rights and reproductive justice, like when I work with folk, just bringing, because usually these are activists that are like in all these other areas, right? But when it comes to reproductive justice, it gets silent, it gets quiet, it gets shameful, it gets, and there's a pulling in, and so working with that, tell your story, and bring your story to this other room, right? Because it is absolutely connected. Right? Because you bring all of yourself into any room that you enter, and so systems of care that help shore folk up and find their voice and their power.
I will piggyback off of you, Gina, and say, telling your story is, I said last year, or maybe it was a year before, I was in a conference, and story is sacred. The entire of civilization is built on sacred story and sacred song. Every people of the world has a story about how their people got to the world. And from that story, we created tribes, and from tribes, we created towns, and from towns, cities. And now we have a whole civilization built on sacred story and sacred song. So still telling your story is the story on which we build the new world that we are trying to build. Because believe it or not, it's the stories that were not told that will be the foundation for the next world that we're trying to build. It's the stories of the Black, Brown, Indigenous, queer people that got left out of the larger story. And the one thing that I can say in terms of compassionate care is that that is something that I lean into when I am talking to faithful people in my community who are wrestling with this idea, well, what, this thought process of it being murder. I was like, you know what? We are all wrestling theologically with things all day, every day, and what we believe or don't believe. I said, but the one thing that we can be sure of, the one thing that I think all of our traditions of love encourage us to do is to be compassionate and merciful and loving to the people who are in our community, who are making hard decisions for their lives. And I think the more that we tell stories, people will realize that someone that you love has had an abortion. And
Thank
you
you.
don't know it because we have created this air of secrecy where they have had to make probably one of the most challenging decisions in their lives in a closet, hidden away to avoid stigma that really should have never been there in the first place. So if we can lean into our compassion, even if we don't understand, have the right words to resist this concept of abortion as murder, what we can say is that I'm going to create a space in my community, in my life, where the people that I love will not feel afraid to come to me and be with me when they're trying to make tough decisions in their lives.
Another
Well,
word
and-
on words.
And, you know, I mean,
Add to the I wanna like even strengthen that more. Even more, especially Gina brought up the word sovereignty, and I know that was one of the things that we had discussed, and the RJ principle of autonomy is so central. And one of the things I forgot to say, but it kind of actually makes more sense now. But the religious right, the story that they are telling is that they have this messed up version of Genesis 1-3, where they talk about God as the sole author of life, God is the sovereign of all life. And if you have an abortion, then you have selfishly denied that sovereignty, and you have lived into the sin of Adam and Eve, but of course Eve in particular. And that's where so much of the shame and the stigma and this sense of something occupying people that needs to be evicted, I think, comes from. It's this sense that there has to be this patriarchal sovereignty over reproductive capacity. But the truth is that isn't even a very good, and Donnie can speak to this more clearly, hopefully, but that's not a good reading of Genesis 1-3, in that God is not the only agent involved in creation and in procreation. The deep, the earth, the seas, Eve, are all doing the work. Read the story again. Read the text, and they are doing the work. God just like has this idea, and I'm not saying that God isn't involved or isn't important. That's not what I mean. To those for whom that is important, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is recognize that there are a lot of agents involved and a long process over time. So this idea that there's ex nihilo persons that are created in an instant, that the religious right wants us to believe, and therefore we're bad people if we say no to that, is just wrong. It's not biblical and it's not biological.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I want to continue this conversation forever, because I'm like learning so much, but it's also so rare. They're able to get people from at least I feel like I'm from a very different background and upbringing as somebody. I literally moved to this country in 2008. I still feel very new here. But that also means that I'm still catching up to a lot of how things are talked about. And I actually just was like noting down all of the things that you all have said, because it's a lot to unravel. It's a lot to unpack. And I cannot imagine growing up young, in this country and going to school here and having to unpack a lot of these things. And I know that a lot of our activists and members that are new to this work and new to this issue, even though they're not new to it existing, but talking about it and organizing around it, are really benefiting from this. So we do have a few questions, and what we're going to do is do a little pivot, is that we're going to take a few questions now, and then Gina, if it's okay, would love for you to close us out with a ritual. So some of the questions that we are getting, and we've actually gotten this a few times before, is one question we got was from somebody named Joel. As a Christian guy in an evangelical church in America, I feel very anxious about discussing abortion because I fear I might risk my community. Abortion is more complex to me than the slogan protects the lives of the unborn, and I'm not convinced that simply illegalizing abortion is the best solution. How can I take small steps to share my perspective in a humble way? So, the gist of the question is, if you're in somewhat of a religiously conservative community, how do you start this conversation? What do you do? How do you do it in a way that doesn't alienate you from your community as well? I would love to hear from anybody on this one.
I can start a little, I guess, because I'm from that type of background where it's conservative. I think first of all, I want to acknowledge that your feelings are valid, because there is the true risk of ostracizing your community by having that conversation. So let me first acknowledge that. For me, what I would suggest is start the conversation with a safe person and create a critical mass. There's somebody in your congregation that you already talked to about other subjects that may be not the general consensus of the larger body. Start a conversation maybe with them and see where their head is at, and if they are able to have that conversation with you in a way that does not feel dangerous, and then find another. It is my understanding and my experience that progressive change comes in churches from the bottom up and not from the top down. Unfortunately, especially in Christian spaces. And so the more of you that you can gather unto yourselves who want to have this conversation, it will actually push the leadership into having the conversation more. So yeah, I would start with a safe person and go from there.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add?
I just want to say that it's definitely on a whole host of topics, that exact concern, I think, is what stops, any kind of, probably way more people in a lot of these communities, are on board with all kinds of progressive things, but, and the polling for lots of things shows that. But, it's hard to broach it. So yeah, I totally agree with Kenyatta, starting in a cautious way, affirming that concern. If you are worried about being ostracized, that's a real thing, that we're programmed not to do that, to get thrown out to the tigers. So, so people do have to be careful, but also finding values that are adjacent. So, like what kinds of values are already overtly expressed in the community that seem like they resonate with some of these things. That's kind of a way in to say, well, wait a minute, if we actually value this, then why are we not kind of looking at this a different way or something like that?
Thank you. This other question that I got is a big one, and I won't say that I haven't been thinking about this one myself from an organizing standpoint, which is commitment to abortion justice waning in some ways? I don't know if I agree with that, but I do have some curiosity about the second part of this question is, do we need to organize differently in these times? What about these times necessitates experimentation? Are there things we could be doing differently, innovating, new relationships we might want to be building, new ways of approaching this? Go ahead, Rabbi Danya. See ya.
I do not think that commitment to abortion justice is waning. I think, if anything, there are more people now who have maybe been in a little bit of a comfortable state and had long, even though ban after ban after ban after ban have been passed on the state level, our rights have been eroded little by little. again, primarily impacting communities of color and communities where people do not have a lot of money, right? So bans have been passed and have been impacting people's lives on a regular basis for a long time. But now, particularly with these high profile cases, I think a lot of people have been woken up from a comfortable place and saying, oh, wait, something's happening. We need to get off our butts and mobilize. And I do think, I think we need to mobilize. I think that there's an understanding more than ever that there needs to be less, we need to just use the language, like we need to say abortion and push everybody to say abortion and to stop trying to make people comfortable, to get to just sort of bring people in instead of trying to comfortably bring people in, and to stop trying to find the on-ramps and to just kind of drive the truck onto the curb, so to speak. So I think that's one thing. And I think, there are lots of different ways. So at NCJW, we have a network of rabbis for repro. We have almost 1,500 rabbis and cantors and other Jewish clergy who are part of our network, who have pledged to preach, teach, and advocate for reproductive health rights and justice. And so we are trying to, work our connectors. We're not the usual connectors for reproductive advocacy to try to mobilize the Jewish community in that way. And we're about to launch a new campaign called 73 Forward. If you go to 73forward.org, you will find we're going to be launching in a couple of weeks, and you can sign up to get the stuff. And it's going to be a massive faith-based mobilization focused on the reproductive freedom aspect, or the religious freedom aspect of this work, and then moving both towards the legislative piece, right, getting WIPA passed, the Women's Health Protection Act, for those just tuning in, which is the bill that has passed the House that we need to get past the Senate, so that even if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, this would be the legislative solution to abortion rights. And then we would need the EACH Act passed, which would help with access. There are two important pieces of legislation y'all should know about. So it's about that. And then most critically, it's a movement to get education going about medication abortion, which is a way to education and advocacy, like working with the FDA and those kinds of things, because that is one way that people can access abortion care from home, rural communities. We can try to talk about the pricing of it, et cetera. There are a lot of issues, but it is a way to expand abortion access in really significant ways. And so 73forward.org is that's another organizing tool, right? We need to be thinking about all of the different arms. And I think we are, people in the movement are and have been. And some of this is just education and strategy and getting the word out and trying to get different parts of the community on the case, basically. And there, like, for example, medication abortion, people don't know about it, don't understand, what, like, it is not, it's just like, there's a lot of work that can be done that we need to do. And there are other parts of the work that need to be done. And so we need to, the other people who are taking up different pieces of this work. And I'm sure I'm gonna hit that mute button and somebody else is gonna say some really smart things. So I'm gonna do that now.
Go ahead, Camilla.
Okay. I was going to say, I agree that I do not believe that support is waning. Actually, I believe that probably now more than any time in my life, there is more support, at least that I'm aware of. Granted, me and Roe v. Wade are the same age. Literally, it was passed the week after I was born. So I've never lived in a world without it. But but I think that I've seen more support now probably than any time in my life. But it's just not being reflected in policy. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is a cultural shift that needs to happen. And so while we have people who are doing important policy work, there is an overwhelming need for narrative shift and culture shift. Our friends on the conservative right side of this issue have mastered the art of narrative, and they have been pushing it for 40 plus years. And we have to reclaim a narrative as faithful, as progressive, faithful people. It is time for us to shift the culture. While our colleagues are doing what they're doing around policy, we have to be shifting the culture, because the fact of the matter is policy change usually comes on the heel of culture shift. You know, LGBTQ rights, that was a 40-year culture battle that ended in marriage equality. But they fought for, you know what I'm saying? We as queer people fought for 40 years. And now we're fighting for other things in the queer community culturally, because when the culture shifts, it gives license for the politicians to do what is already should have been done. It gives them license to do what is right. And so for me, I am very invested in narrative shift and very invested in culture shift. To that end, at Sister Song Be It Amplified, which is a collaborative campaign that we work through with the help of some great cross-movement organizers. Last year, we created the Justice Statement for Progressive People of Faith. And if you go to Just Faith for a Just World, it is a statement of faith for progressive people of faith who, like Rabbi Danya says, are committed to creating a just world. And this statement says that just like our friends on the right say their faith compels them to deny people access to the things that they need, our faith compels us to fight for a just world for everybody. And this is what this just world looks like. And we enumerated through different lenses of advocacy, including reproductive justice. If you sign on, that statement will be used as a mobilizing tool to help people regionally find their people so that we can keep fighting for the policy change that we need. But taking back the narrative and saying, yes, I'm faithful and I believe in a just world, that my faith requires me to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before God and not to oppress.
Beautiful, beautiful nods and claps and appreciation for that, Kenyatta. So Gina, I'd love to turn it to you about centering care in our movements as you close us out in a means of showing us that closing out with care is important. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I've been so honored to sit in circle with y'all. Thank you. I would add to organizing family that we center care in our marches, in our gatherings, in our dinners, right? In all that we do, centering care as an act of resistance and persistence, as an act of love. And so we're going to close this space that we have entered together. We are sealing it shut, because in my tradition, you close what you've opened. Please, let's take more collective breaths together, inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. These conversations are ongoing. This be a long walk, we know, but we pray that you walk away with a deeper understanding of what is possible. Inhaling, exhaling at your own pace. Please take care of yourselves, hydrate well, have a good meal. If you are a person who journals, write down what comes for you, where you think this work is living in your body. Because the way to shift a narrative is to find where it is and put yourself there. Inhaling together and exhaling together. This space is closed. We thank you. Be well.
Thank you so much, Gina. And with that, I just want to extend deep appreciation to all of you and to every single person that attended this conversation. I hope that you learned as much as we did from each other about shifting narratives, about reclaiming power, and about practicing care. And please be on the lookout for an email from us with resources for all of the links, all of the different language manuals, all types of things that were brought up today. And I just want to say thank you so much to Auburn Seminary for partnering with us, for putting this program together, and for being our partners in this work. We deeply, deeply appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful night.